last week, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, the latest Jim Carrey film, ran into theaters and gave him the biggest opening weekend of his career. But also during the press tour for the film, he indicated that he's retiring from acting.
Well, I'm retiring, but
no.
Yeah, probably.
Are you being serious or are you screwing with me?
I'm being fairly serious, yeah.
So it seems like the perfect time to share my picks for my 5 favorite Jim Carrey films. So let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Sean and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comments section. Share your favorite Jim Carrey movies. One more thing before we get started, this video is brought to you by my supporters over on Patreon. Patreon is a membership site where you can support my channel financially and in return, gain access to exclusive videos and live streams. Last year on Patreon, I had 29 exclusive videos, 38 Ask Me Anythings, and 30 plus early release or extended videos. And speaking of exclusive videos, there's a companion video over on Patreon with 4 more of my favorite Jim Carrey films. If you're interested in joining, the link is down below in the description, and let's get started. In 5th place, Ace Ventura Pet Detective. Now, this movie came out when I was in the 6th grade, and I knew of Jim Carrey as Fire Marshal Bill from In Living Color.
You just happen to be holding a match.
Hey! You're not gonna like that, are you?
Don't worry, folks. I'm a fire marshal.
He was a scene stealer on this sketch comedy show and was known for his very over-the-top, wild, highly physical performances. And then the trailer came out for Ace Ventura, and immediately we're like, hey, the guy from that show, he's got his own movie. We gotta go check this one out. The movie came out, and I was the perfect age for all of this film's immature antics, and this was the movie that just instantly propelled him to the A-list and established him as just this bankable comedic force of nature. And potentially of all of his movies, this is the one where you just get full-blown high-octane Jim Carrey cranked up to 11, where he just goes for it. It's a simple enough concept about this pet detective. The main plot of the film, it's like, okay, a little bit of a mystery that you don't care all that much about. It's not the memorable part about the film. The thing that matters, the thing that stands out, is that Jim Carrey is just so funny and absolutely fearless in this film and just goes for it. And it is just jam-packed with quotable moments.
Alrighty then. Excuse me. I'd like to ask you a few questions.
That became part of the 90s zeitgeist, that everyone knew these quotes, these little moments, and just in conversation, they would come up constantly, and this became a recurring theme for Jim Carrey, especially in the year 1994, when he exploded, where his movies were just filled with so many iconic, memorable 90s quotes and moments. So this is the movie that really made him a movie star. He'd actually been in movies before this and even starred in some movies before this, but this is where everything changed. And to this day, it's one of his most iconic performances. In 4th place, The Truman Show. After over half a decade of just playing these over-the-top, larger-than-life characters where he just always cranked it up to 11 and went for it, he started trying to transition into more serious acting, and one of the big films in that was The Truman Show, which was one of his first serious performances. And it showed that he could be funny, he could be charming, he could deliver a leading man performance without it having to rely on the fact that his face can contort like crazy and he can do incredible physical comedy. It's also a film that was very much ahead of its time. It was about 3, 4, 5 years ahead of where culture was headed, where reality television exploded right after the turn of the century, and you had all these TV shows that were relied on showing real life things, but it wasn't actually real life. It was these contrived pretend scenarios, and this movie came out right before that. And so it commented on what was about to happen and told this poignant story about this person that had lived reality television without even knowing it. And everyone around him was in on it, was in on the joke, was in on the show, except for him. He'd lived a lie, but he didn't even know he was living a lie. Everyone else was just forming this lie all around him. So a movie with a great concept, a great turn in Jim Carrey's career, where he started moving on to that next phase that relied on more than just his manic, crazy energy and physical comedy, and showed he's a real actor and told this compelling story. It was actually ahead of its time. Real quick, before I give you my top 3, I want to share an honorable mention. Now remember, there is a companion video with 4 more of my favorite Jim Carrey films, where I'll talk about several more of his big, gigantic hit films that, of course, you want me to talk about. But here I want to talk about one of his underrated films, and that's going to be The Cable Guy. This is a Ben Stiller directed film that came out right in the middle of Jim Carrey mania, that people didn't know what to do with when it first came out, because it is this really dark comedy that doesn't go where you think it's going, and he's not really the hero. He's the title character, but he's kind of the villain of it, playing this very tragic, disturbing character. And so it's a movie that a lot of people, when we first watched it in the mid-90s, were like, what on earth is this?
Come back here so that I may bring thee!
And kind of wrote it off and forgot about it. And then as time has passed, I think it's a film that's aged really well as you start to realize what they were doing with the film, what they were trying to say, and that it's a movie that Jim Carrey's reputation at the time probably played against the film a little bit, because people expected him to be a more chipper, fun character. And you have the energy, you have all the stuff you expect from Jim Carrey, but a really dark, disturbing character at its core that a lot of us didn't interpret it right at the time, but I think it's aged better than it played when it first came out. And once again, when you have Ben Stiller directing, he's a great comedic director that has a lot more depth than sometimes he gets credit for. In third place is The Mask, and this is a film that was such a massive cultural force when it came out, but at the same time, I feel like it's been a little bit forgotten over the last 15 years. Back in the 90s, there were so many quotes from this movie that were just part of the common vernacular that people would just go smoking all the time, and everybody knew exactly what you're talking about. The film was a huge, gigantic hit. It's the movie that solidified Jim Carrey as an A-lister. You got Ace Ventura's the movie that launched him into being a leading man, and this one went, this guy's not a one-hit wonder. He is here to stay. Likewise, it's the movie that introduced the world to Cameron Diaz, that I don't think she'd been in anything prior to this movie, and instantly became this A-list actress because of this movie. And it was such a hit, and she was so beloved in it that she became this big, gigantic actress for the next 20 years. Likewise, there was this swing revival that happened in the late 90s, and this movie is one of the pieces that kind of like started getting people interested in swing music once again at that period in time. Also, this is a comic book movie that was a big, gigantic hit at a point in time where only Batman movies were comic book movie big, gigantic hits. And out of the blue, this kind of obscure dark horse comic book makes $350 million worldwide. Why? Because Jim Carrey was such a comedic force of nature, such a wrecking ball, that he just took over the world instantly because he was so good. So perfect in the lead in this film as this live action cartoon character. That's who he is, and it was the perfect casting at the perfect point in time, and he brought so much energy to it that everybody went to go see it. Everybody talked about it. And I'm still fascinated by the fact that it just feels like this is a movie that people don't talk about as much. Even in terms of Jim Carrey films, Dumb and Dumber, still people talk about it. Of course, Ace Ventura and all these other films. But this one I don't feel like gets talked about quite as much. Our runner-up, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Continuing down the path that was somewhat started with The Truman Show. A few years later, he was in this film, which once again had a comedic side to it, but it really allowed him to shine as an actor. But honestly, the real star of this movie was the screenplay from Charlie Kaufman. Now, Charlie Kaufman was the screenwriter in the late 90s through the early zeros that just wrote a string of these insanely weird movies that were also very emotional, very human, while having just bizarre concepts. One of them started with called Being John Malkovich, which had a bunch of John Malkoviches in it. And then he did one called Adaptation with Nicolas Cage that was basically about himself writing the script for the movie itself. And then he did this film, which is probably the most mainstream of the films, but still, it's this movie that's exploring the concept of memory and love, and it's sci-fi, but at its core, it's a very human love story about the nature of relationships. And that's what Charlie Kaufman did so well, is finding a way to tell very weird stories that were funny, but personal and emotional all at the same time. And that's what this movie did perfectly. And they got the right two people to star in it, with Kate Winslet and Jim Carrey, who of course are world-class actor, world-class actress, also just a nice charm to them. And once again, just one of those movies at the right place, right time, right script, right cast, to just do something really special, something different, something memorable. If you haven't seen this movie, this is one I would highly recommend checking out, because it is a unique, distinct cinematic experience that is accessible while being weird, while being funny, and having a lot of heart and emotion and humanity to it. But coming in at number one, I have to go with Dumb and Dumber. As I previously mentioned in this video, I was the perfect age for the rise of Jim Carrey, where right as I started being able to see like PG-13 comedies, he was the up-and-comer that just exploded and dominated PG-13 comedies all throughout my middle school and high school days. And he kicked it off with this year where he had Ace Ventura, The Mask, and then Dumb and Dumber. And the one of those films that I've rewatched the most, explored the most as an adult, that continues to be quotable to me, it's Dumb and Dumber.
I like it a lot.
Just one of the funniest movies ever made that manages to be incredibly dumb while having something like handling the dumbness in a really clever, funny way. And part of what makes it so special is the fact that they took a comedic actor at the time and blended him with a, generally speaking, serious actor. Whereas Jeff Daniels that year also did an action movie. He was in Speed and he was in Dumb and Dumber, but he's known for more being a dramatic actor, and the combination just made for such a great comedic duo where both of them give it their all. They're willing to do base level humor, physical comedy, wordplay, and all of the jokes land. Whether it's dark, it's silly, it's physical, all of it works.
So you're telling me there's a chance?
It's also a movie, like, you don't really care about the plot. It's just a series of laugh out loud scenarios that are memorable, that are iconic, that you see them and you want to go tell someone about what you just watched, which is what my friends and I would do all throughout the 90s, just reciting to each other bits from Dumb and Dumber. So for me, the one that I've quoted the most, I've watched the most, and the one that got the most laughs out of me, it was absolutely Dumb and Dumber. So it comes in at number 1. Remember, there's a companion video to this over on my Patreon page where you can find 4 more of my favorite Jim Carrey films. Also, my buddy Cody Leach is sharing his favorite Jim Carrey movies today. You can check out his video right over there as well. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.